Hello, everyone. I am Luke Reinhardt. Welcome to Closing the Gap, a podcast dedicated to your growth. Brought to you by Wellspring Coaching Services and hosted by myself and my wife, Katie. You know, people have gaps that prevent them from growing. Our goal is to empower you to close those gaps by increasing your awareness, confidence, and clarity. Join us today as we help you close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. All right, guys, welcome to today's show, Season 1, Episode 11. Today we're going to be talking about commitment and perseverance and how in order to persevere, it is crucial to understand commitment.
Yeah.
Right? So I have a quote that says, "It is the space between commitment and perseverance that our true character is revealed." Right? So let that sink in for a minute. Just think about that and what that means. You know, that space between saying, yeah, I want to do this, and actually accomplishing what you set out to do. That space in between, depending on what it is, you know, there's going to be trials. There's going to be...
That's the tough part
there.
That's
the tough part. You know, that's where our character is revealed.
And that's what, in terms of coaching, oftentimes people get stuck or hit obstacles in that process. And coaching can come in, and that can be self-coaching, doesn't have to be professional coaching, but it's so common to get tripped up in that journey from A to B that there's resources in place because it's so common, and coaching is one of those resources. You know, in our podcast, Closing the Gap is, you know, helping you get from where you are, point A, to where you want to be, point B, you know, and there's that space, there's that gap, right? And we believe that's the navigation of that space develops your character. And it's the hard part, it's the suffering part, it's the part where you're really grinding. But when you put the work in, you're really seeing the flourishing of the person, you know? Yeah, totally. And it's common to get stuck. So you don't want to stay beating yourself up or just stay in that stuck place. You want to say, you know what, this is common. I'm in that situation where my wheels are just spinning right now, but I still want to get to B. Yeah. And I need to figure out how to get there. So it often or sometimes even, will require the help and assistance of others too. Yeah, so. Totally. You know, we've talked about in our last few podcasts, you know, just about that true and counterfeit freedom, desire versus discipline. And these kind of all come together, you know what I mean? This is all goal setting. Yeah. It's all working towards something, and how to find the best ways to do that. And in our last podcast, we talked about the importance, you know, of having a true and healthy desire. You know, the greater of a desire that you have to do something, the easier the discipline's going to be. In fact, discipline is the fruit of a healthy desire. So, but now we want to focus in on, you know, the accomplishment of those goals, the perseverance and commitment, because without a true and honest commitment, it's unlikely that you're ever going to persevere in anything, right? Because if it becomes difficult at any time, or even if your interest goes down a little bit in it, or so many things happen from when we start something to however long, it could be years sometimes before we're going to see it through to the end. Right. A lot of things happen in life. A lot of things change. Yeah. And, you know, of course, sometimes we do have to sit back and reevaluate and is this still a healthy thing for me to be doing? Is it still good? Right. But without that initial commitment, just that ability to sit down and anchor, to deliberately consider the task that's going to be ahead of you, to consider the possible pros and cons, consequences possibly, and then based on all that information, you know, make a deliberate decision to say yes, to follow through to the end. It's really important that when we're making commitments that we're actually being very true and very deliberate about that process. And because if you don't do that and you start something like we'll say jiu-jitsu, we train jiu-jitsu here at Clinch Academy, but if you're training jiu-jitsu, it's going to get difficult at times. You know, some people start, I want to learn self-defense, or I want to, get some exercise, you know, and so they start something like jiu-jitsu, or they start CrossFit, or whatever it may be. And, you know, the discipline and the fun and games isn't always there. You know, sometimes it's just hard work. Sometimes you don't feel like going. Sometimes you're not motivated. Sometimes you get injured. There's so many different things that can happen in that journey. Unless you've made that true commitment. You know what? This is something I want to get good at, and I want to follow through. I want to see this to the end. Once those things get difficult, it's very likely that you're going to just quit. Unless you've made that commitment. And I say true and honest commitment because that means that you're saying to yourself, you know, no matter what happens, I'm gonna see this through. You know, and you don't want to be a liar to yourself, right? So you always remember that commitment, and that helps you to persevere through the hard times.
And we often don't have the benefit of like clairvoyancy or foreseeing the future. We don't know what obstacles are going to come, but they come often. They come. And so, and with another point I was thinking about was that different personalities tend to not want to think too far in the future, and other personalities really do a great job, almost too good a job, and I'm thinking of myself in this situation, of predicting or anticipating all the possible struggles that could come. Right? So depending on where you live in your body and in your personality in the world, you know, how you work that out, you may be the type that it's hard, like you don't even worry about the future. You don't worry about, you're just going to make a decision because right now in this very moment it feels great. Right? And so it's easy to make a commitment, but what we're talking about is, and you keep bringing the word up, deliberate. When you decide to make a long-term commitment to something, long could be a year, it could be a lifetime, but when you're making that commitment and it's predicated on the thought that you have thought it through and you're aware that there's going to be struggle and there's going to be suffering, and despite all that, you're in. Right?
So it's important that in this situation, we know you let your yes be your yes and your no be your no kind of thing. It's like, maybe it's something small. Somebody asks you to help them move, or, you know, something like that. And you're like, yeah, I can do that. But you didn't really think about it. You didn't pay attention to your schedule, or there might be things that could be interfering, and you didn't really truly consider whether you could actually do that or not. But you just went ahead and said yes. And it's not a very true and deliberate commitment at that point, right? You might have to back out because you didn't realize something. And, you know, that happens to everybody in many different ways. You know, we all do that. But we should try to be more intentional about avoiding doing that, right? And, you know, even within our little commitments, you know, to say people, if it's something that you can't do or you're not sure, be honest about that up front. You know, I like that. I prefer that. If somebody's just honest with me up front, then rather than getting me to count on them and then them not follow through and show, I would much rather them just say no in the beginning. Because then you still have time to find somebody else, you know, but then if they just don't show at the end, it's like, then you gotta, you know, then you have a heavier burden than what you could have had in the first place.
That's true. And also taking into consideration, sometimes we're strong-armed into commitments. You know, we could be heavily persuaded, or in some cases even, you know, if you're sort of in a people-pleasing type of personality, that can be exploited by others who know that about you, and they put you in a situation that, oh, I know I can get help from them because they usually say yes, you know? So just being aware, what category do I fall in? Am I okay with saying no? do I like, yes, I like to say yes. Am I okay with saying no? Do I always say no? Some people are just always no, I can't do that, without really stopping to consider or being willing to sacrifice a little bit for the sake of others too. So I guess back to the idea of commitment, maybe just what are some examples of different commitments?
Yeah, I mean,
or how it plays out in real life.
It could be an example of just maybe a goal that you're working towards. I want to be able to do this in this amount of time. You're gonna have to, if that's true, then you have to commit to that.
Right.
In order to persevere, to see through to the end, you have to commit to it. It could be marriage.
Yep.
Marriage is a big commitment.
Yeah.
It's good to practice making small commitments.
Before you jump all the way in.
Some people jump all the way in, and that can cause trouble too. But it's good to practice making small commitments. Practice persevering through your commitments, fulfilling your commitments, and work towards bigger commitments. But something like marriage and then parenting is another commitment after marriage. Like
this is lifelong.
Yeah, these are things to be parenting is something to be very thoughtful and deliberate about.
Yes, right. Well, this made me think about with marriage. It was actually, you do these mat chats in martial arts, and you were doing one on commitment and perseverance, the same very topic. And one of our students was about to get married, and he actually asked you to come and speak at the wedding on that topic.
Right.
So that was kind of fun. Being at that wedding and then having you give that speech right before they were actually committing to lifetime together. Because the point was, there is a perseverance to this. Like you guys, one or both of you may want to step out of the situation at some point, or you may find it more difficult than rewarding. And that's just a reality, but you're here today making this commitment.
Yeah.
And this is going to grow you,
Yeah, absolutely.
This is going to grow you.
Then you have things like mortgage payments, ownership, trying to purchase an automobile, purchase a house. These are commitments.
Right. And that too, just the automobile, we had done a loan on our car at one point, and I just remember sitting there thinking, our other car had died. We tend to run our cars into the ground, literally into the ground. And where they're like falling apart. And we had, we did that, and then we had to buy this new car, and we were sitting down to figure out some financing on it, and it was like, they want you to, these options now is you can be committing to pay for this vehicle for like 7 or 8 years. And I'm like, well, I know us, we will have this vehicle for 7 or 8 years, if we're true to form in this case, but the reality is, like, I don't really want to commit to be paying for this car for that long. Like, I need to make sure I'm within the price range that is
scary.
Because I don't know what 7 years from now is going to look like, and if I still have a car payment, or but there's options that wasn't available when I bought my first car. It was capped at a certain number of a certain number of months period. Now it's like the options extend, and that's something like our children now going to, if they wanted to finance a vehicle or get a small loan for something, we would caution them against, hey, think about long term. Do you really want that over your head for 8 years, or is this something you want to try to pay off in 2 or 4? Thinking future about your future, not knowing what it holds, is really important too.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of commitments, from small commitments to
larger,
lifelong commitments like marriage. And then even a commitment like marriage, like I'm not just saying, I want to be with you the rest of my life. That's part of the commitment. But there's a lot that goes on within a marriage that you're also committing to, like personal growth. It requires us both to grow, learn more about one another and about ourselves, and to continue in that path in order for our marriage to keep growing and getting better as well. And when we said our vows, it was for better or worse, till death do us part. I mean, that's a huge.
And then you got really sick on our honeymoon, and I was like, not this early. I shouldn't have to honor this commitment in this way.
So I mean, think through things a little bit. Think through those commitments and what it means. And there's a quote I like. I'm trying to think of the actual quote. I believe it was Higano, losing his name right now. It's a judo guy. Higano.
That's okay.
For whatever reason, but
it'll come back to you.
Yeah. It says consider fully and act decisively. You know, and if you think about that in lines of commitment, you know, you want to consider fully what lies ahead, the pros and the cons,
to the best of your ability.
To the best of your ability, and then act decisively. Make a decision and then act on it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that little quote has helped me with a lot of different things. You know, just thinking about that. When it comes to setting goals, making commitments.
Why do you think people are commitment phobic? There's sort of this label of commitment phobic. Maybe there's varying reasons, but what would you say?
Well, I think sometimes, you know, and we kind of mentioned this in our last podcast, to say yes to one thing is to say no to another. Yeah. And some people don't want to have to say no to other things.
Yeah.
Right. So if I make a commitment now to this, there might be something down the road that I want to do, possibly even more.
Right.
That I'm not going to be able to do because of my current commitment.
Right.
So, but those are the things that you consider before you make the commitment, and then you want to think about, well, how long of a commitment I'm making. Maybe that kind of person doesn't want to make quite as long-term commitments until they're in a different place,
right?
You know, so they have to consider that.
And let's think too about professionally, when you're committing to like a job, committing to a particular position, but also committing to being there when you're called to work. You know, this is an issue for a lot of employers, is getting help that really will be there when they say they're going to be there. We hear that from other business owners a lot. I mean, we're really blessed in our business. We have such a great staff, but like it happens that, you know, there were statistics, I think at one point, maybe in the 80s, what people valued in a job, and it was I can't remember what the top things were. I'm trying to think now. It was probably the pay, and it may have been benefits, something like that, and the environment, something of that sort. And then flash forward to the 2000s, 2010, I think the same questions were asked, and then like the number one criteria for most people was flexibility in their job. So they basically are saying, like, there seems to be a movement in culture against commitment in some sense, where I don't want to have to stick to this so rigidly that I can't do what I want to do. If I want to do something different on this day, I want to be able to do that. If I want to work from home, if I want to go into the office, if I want to take off every Friday morning but work later on, you know, like they want to be able to change their schedule. So that's interesting to note that maybe there is a shift in culture at this moment where perseverance, you know, and making the commitment and persevering through might be more challenging, or maybe it's not seen as valuable in some sense.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, perseverance is the ability to endure to the end. Yeah. And this concept of endurance, you know, it kind of hints with suffering, you know. Yeah. So people don't like to suffer. No. You know, and that's the same thing as we talked about with discipline. I mean, there's suffering involved in discipline. Yeah. But when your desire is high enough to do something, when you have a strong desire to do something, the discipline falls in line, and the suffering, there's actually a joy in the suffering at this point, because you know you are working towards something greater. Sure. And I think that when you're making commitments, you know, you do, like, you're going to suffer. Like, we suffer in our marriage sometimes, you know, just, you know, with our differences and being able to grow and change. Yeah. There's a form of dying to self. And that's a form of suffering. But at the end of the day, there's a joy in it because we're creating something even greater than what we have alone. Right. Right. So, and that takes us back to more podcasts when it comes to the true and the counterfeit freedom. I mean, I really believe that when you're willing to suffer and obey the laws of whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
That freedom comes through that obedience,
Yeah.
you know, and that discipline, and on a whole new level than what that counterfeit freedom we talked about. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, just go back to that podcast. But there's a whole new level in that kind of freedom for sure.
Yeah, and I also want to point out, since we're talking about marriage, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about, these long-term heavy commitments, that there's good suffering and bad suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is a time in a situation for sure where it's in your best interest to break a commitment.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's just a case by case. So I don't want anyone listening to think that we're saying, you stick it out no matter what at all times, because that's just not true. It's just not true. Sometimes you make decisions without all the information, or new things come to light and you have to change, right?
Yeah.
And even with like the jiu-jitsu journey, think you could be in a car accident and you can't finish. You committed to this, or something comes up in your life that just takes priority. That's fine. But what we're saying is go in with eyes wide open, not with the thought that this isn't going to be hard. I'm not going to have to sacrifice or push, or making those decisions even for something like financial. It's helpful to really think through, like try to project forward, like 5 years from now. I don't know where I'll be, but we may be in this situation. Are we still going to want this? Or should we go for the lower end model, not quite as flashy, not so many bells and whistles, but, we won't feel so strapped or stressed or whatever later. And I think too, it's a growth process. Wherever you are right now listening to this podcast, just acknowledge that you are a creature in growth, just like we are, just like everyone else around. And you're either pursuing that growth, or, in some sense, you're moving backwards, really. And so give yourself grace and freedom to keep moving forward, and be encouraged by the fact that when you make a commitment, you are going to suffer. That's just part of it. But there is great reward in using it for personal growth and for the service of others.
Yeah, and like some of you out there may have a job right now that you're just not happy with at all.
Yeah.
But you feel like you're fully committed to the job, and wouldn't quit. And that's a great attribute to have, right? But it might be a good time to consider other options sometimes. We're not saying that you have to make your life miserable. Sometimes it is better and more healthy to move on, and you just need to use some wisdom with that, and just be intentional. We're saying be intentional about your commitments,
The commitments you make.
Don't be wishy-washy, but be intentional about the commitments that you make. Think about it. Be very deliberate about the process and the decision, and then do your best to follow through and to persevere. And just don't take that lightly.
Right.
Because with perseverance does come great joy.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And there is an element of risk to all those commitments, only because we can't see the future fully. There is an element of risk, but there's calculated risk. And then there's just, throw caution to the wind, jump in with 2 feet, that kind of thing. I'm using every possible catchphrase apparently in this podcast. But
All right,
it's
guys.
a great topic.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Commitment and perseverance. We hope that you guys enjoyed it. And until next time, keep using this information to close the gap from where you are to where you want to be.